nolimi. Iyo awethi nasobabili. Siyathandana singamathe nolimi. Iyo awethi nasobabili. Siyathandana singamathe nolimi. Iyo awethi nasobabili. Siyathandana njengamathe nolimi we. From isuka lenta ngicala ukukubona ngavele ngasangana ngathi uye lona umakondana wami awuyasifela ngawe yabona umuntu wakunemali eningi thina amashada siye Paris njengo-Big Zulu sidla inyama eningi shade of sifala marketing ayi thina amashada siye Paris njengo-Big Zulu sidla inyama eningi yabona umuntu wakunemali eningi shade of sifala marketing yabona umuntu
Hello, hello, dear esteemed guests. We'll be starting in 5 minutes. Please join us in Kilimanjaro room.
The most exciting session of UNEP, ladies and gentlemen. Please make your way in.
You're much better dressed than we are. Well done. Well done. Well, I guess we don't represent countries, do we? Haven't seen them. There's no club.
Good afternoon, ladies. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. How do you feel? Good? Okay, so let's start with an icebreaker question, although Josh tells me that none of you are icy, but I think this is the graveyard shift. So let me start with a couple of questions. First, what is your closest guess of global assets under management today? And the PPD team is not allowed to answer this question. So, what is your closest guess to the total assets under management today? And no Googling it. Closest guess, no penalties. Someone, anyone? 300 trillion. Alison, wonderful guess. Anyone?
800 trillion.
Yeah, I can keep waiting for an answer. So 800 trillion. Excellent. So the answer, actually, Alison gets about 1,000 million points from me, because the answer is $140 trillion, ladies and gentlemen, right? So closest to the answer. Okay, second quiz question before we open this session. What is the total amount of philanthropic giving that we have seen in 2024 globally? So, philanthropic giving globally in 2024. $500 million. Going once. Thanks.
Alison knows.
No. Alison's not allowed. 3 billion. 3 trillion. And your name is? Irina. So the answer is $1.5 trillion. Not bad. Okay. My last question, okay, is what is the overall financing gap that we are witnessing, and I can see a few interested faces, in the SDGs today? Come on, everyone. This is a UN organization. We should have this on top of our brains. What is the fund? $2? Yeah. $2. Okay, going once. Very far. Very cold. Freezing.
$2 per minute per person over 1 year.
$2 per minute per person over 1 year. Yeah. So say 7 billion people, 14 billion, but multiplied by the number of minutes in a year. That's a huge amount. No. So, okay. So the answer is $4.5 trillion, right? So the three numbers again. The overall assets under management, $140 trillion. The overall philanthropic giving in 2024 that we know, $1.5 trillion. And the SDG financing gap today, $4.5 trillion. Do the math. Clearly, there's a huge space for us to step up, not just from philanthropies and from NGOs, but clearly across the world, if we are truly intentional and mission-driven about the things that we all care about, because we are voting with our feet today. We are here because we want to know together how multilateral agencies, philanthropies, international NGOs, other altruistic organizations can truly think about catalyzing giving to causes that we care about. And clearly, because we are all here, the climate and environment is right on top of our head. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jo Puri. I'm the Director of Policy and Programs, and we have our last guest, so this was my warm-up, just as Goody walks up to the stage and gives us gender balance as well. And I'm really privileged to be here in with a very, very august panel, to be really thinking in depth and substantively about what we can do to catalyze action given all of the challenges that we are facing today in the world. And I have three very quick messages. The first, the time is now. We know what the challenge is, what the financing gap is. We know what the possibilities are. And we know that we've got to bring these worlds together with the kinds of modalities and the innovations that we are seeing, whether that's in blended finance and diversified risk portfolios, and really trying to understand as to what are the risks that we are witnessing when we are going into least developed countries or working with vulnerable people. We have massive amounts of data to really target well, and we have massive amounts of data to also understand what is the impact that we are witnessing as a consequence of our investments, of our giving, and of our policy work. So that's first. The time is now. The second message is that clearly we need to be catalytic. I'm really proud to be representing UNEP here. UNEP has had the privilege of working with several philanthropies and organizations that are giving with a mission-driven purpose, and many of them are represented here. In the past 5 years, we've seen more than $50 million basically come into UNEP initiatives, which in itself may seem very small, but actually the amount that they catalyze is huge. So just to give you a sense of the magnitudes, the current program under implementation that UNEP currently has is, anyone? Projects under implementation, even UNEP colleagues are allowed to answer. $3.3 billion, right? So we have under implementation $3.3 billion, and it goes across all of the sector areas that you possibly could be thinking of, within climate, within environment, within pollution, waste, and chemicals. And that's important, because not only is UNEP science-driven and evidence-driven, but it takes a whole of government, whole of sector approach in understanding that when we go in with science, when we go in with evidence, we've got to also think about justice and equity and economics. And that integrated policy package and that program package is really critical. So the second message is really that catalyzing investments. We've got 60 million coming in, but we're really multiplying that, making impact on the ground with our more than $3 billion portfolio on the ground. And my third message is impact. In a separate conversation just before this panel started, I was speaking with one of the panelists, and I was talking about my background. So I come from a space where I continue to think, this is what I eat, dream, think, sleep about, and you can ask my team, is impact, impact, impact. How do we prove it? How do we measure it? How do we show it? And it's really important as a multilateral institution for us to be credible about it, right? We have the data today, but it is also true that with the surfeit of data, we've got what I call, in a friendly way, impact washing, right? So you can have a lot of institutions telling us anecdotal stories about what they're doing without giving us a systematic idea of what's happening on the ground. And this is why I'm really proud to be at UNEP, because UNEP truly thinks about the science and the evidence behind measurement and is championing the effort to increase the credibility of our impact on the ground. So the three messages are: the time is now, because we've got the modalities and the instruments. The second is we need to be catalytic, and we've got to think about the new modalities, instruments, and innovations that we are seeing. And third, we've got to think about impact, because that's the end game. With that, I'm really privileged to introduce my very august panel, and also to introduce my co-conspirator, Director Sumi Rowe. Sumi, please. Thank you very much. So we are very excited to have this panel and all of you here, and we're hoping that we can make it as interactive as possible. I'm going to start with the way we're going to run the show is I'm going to ask our first three speakers to come up or stay in their places and share for approximately 4 minutes the key ideas about how and what they are doing to really be catalytic, impactful through their efforts and the organizations that they represent in collaboration with UNEP today. So I'm going to start with the three of them. And then we're going to open it up to our panel. We're really excited to have Richard and Goody, but I'll introduce them in a minute. First, I really want to introduce Joss, who's here from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And over to you, Joss.
Thanks a lot, Joe. And thanks very much for the opportunity to speak. I'll be obviously talking from the point of view not of a funder, because the Ellen MacArthur Foundation is not a grant-making organization, but as an implementation partner. And I guess the first message, because you kindly put us in the framework of having clear, bullet-pointed messages, the first one is without philanthropic support, neither me nor my other colleagues running the grounds at UNEP would be here. And it's absolutely critical to acknowledge the importance of philanthropic funding when it comes to catalyzing action and system change. Most of you will know the Ellen MacArthur Foundation through our work on plastics, and it's completely fair to say that without philanthropic funding, we wouldn't have started, because the private sector was not keen on putting money behind this. They were the second mover. And once the businesses started to get engaged in the plastics discussion, philanthropic funding guaranteed our independence, and still does. So that's absolutely critical. It's also in that plastic sphere that the collaboration with UNEP was really formalized through the creation in 2018 of the Global Commitment for a New Plastics Economy, which had time-bound commitments, a monitoring framework, a reporting mechanism every single year, and all the companies and governments that signed up to it had to report, had to be transparent on their progress. So this is really the first incarnation of the work that we've done concretely with UNEP on plastics, but of course we're not alone. And you know, Bonnie here from the Minderoo Foundation, the work that you guys have been doing as well in that space, bringing the knowledge, bringing the science, bringing the advocacy, has been absolutely critical. And yes, plastics is a difficult topic. We know it hasn't been easy recently. A lot of people have been, you know, burnt and still are very tired, but there's still a lot of space for a global agreement. We need to still continue to push. We're also in a very difficult environment in general for all the topics that we're all pushing here today, which means that we live in an era which demands more than ever clear results, which is difficult because systems change is hard to marry sometimes with very clear KPIs, and where the money goes, it needs to demonstrate clear impact, whether it's through added investment or material flows that change. You know, it's much easier to have a small conservation project. You take a degraded ecosystem, over 10 years you inject money. You can monitor that really easily. System change is very difficult, but that's what we need to do now, which means that we need to build the trust also with the philanthropic partner, have a clear strategic plan, and also get informed by them on our strategy. So it's a trust-building relationship, which is absolutely key. And so I think that the message that I would leave you with for the moment is focus on impact, concrete results, because short of that, I'm afraid that big ideas are not that much in fashion anymore at the moment.
Thank you so much, Joss. So independence, trust, impact, and results.
Yeah.
Big things that I'm taking away. Thank you very much. Bonnie, I'm going to turn to you. And Joss, so Bonnie, over to you. And you're coming from the Minderoo Foundation, and you've had some experience of also working with UNEP, but really excited to have you and to hear your opening remarks on working with within a foundation and the responsibility that you think you have in changing the world. Over to you.
Thank you. It's an honour to be here to join this conversation, and a very important conversation about how philanthropy and UNEP can really work together to accelerate transformative change. And the urgency of the problems we face cannot be understated. We're in a triple planetary crisis with climate change, biodiversity loss and pollution that's reshaping our societies and economies. I come from the Minderoo Foundation, as shared. It's an Australian philanthropy, and in our natural ecosystems portfolio, it's dedicated to safeguarding healthy ecosystems for all generations. We focus on protecting ocean biodiversity. Healthy ecosystems for all generations requires us to mitigate climate impacts and addressing systematic barriers to limit conservation outcomes. Our work has strong alignment to UNEP's in many areas, such as the Global Biodiversity Framework's Target 3 30 by 30 work. So in ocean conservation, our work looks to support the expansion of the Marine Protected Area estate globally, and to support the ratification and implementation of the High Seas Treaty, or BBNJ. and supporting the development of sustainable finance mechanisms to ensure that area-based mechanisms can be effective in delivering their conservation outcomes. These efforts not only protect nature, they also deliver benefits to communities, food security and climate stability. Philanthropy, unlike other traditional forms of funding, can really move early. It can take higher risks and it can invest in innovation. This helps unlock and de-risk solutions and create a momentum for system change that allows governments and multilaterals to later scale. Minderoo works across a spectrum of capital, so from impact investments all the way to grants. And between those two extremes, we have catalytic capital, which is designed for investment opportunities that are high risk, that are likely to lead to only small financial returns, but are highly aligned in our impact strategy. And these catalytic capital investments can de-risk these bold ideas and mobilise additional capital, as you described, for these scalable solutions. A few examples of where we've used our catalytic investments is in the Tropical Forest Forever facility to assist the confidence of unlocking additional capital for long-term forest protection. Similarly, we have provided the risk investment for RARE's small-scale fisheries impact bond. This is in Indonesia, which would demonstrate how early funding can help communities transition to sustainable practices, paving the way for much larger investments. Philanthropy can also amplify voices and have a role in advocacy, which elevates awareness through our storytelling. One example of this is we recently had a major collaboration with the David Attenborough's Ocean documentary, and it is one example of how compelling narratives can shift global conversations and drive action. None of this happens in isolation, and our greatest multiplier occurs when philanthropic, government, and mission-driven organisations, such as yourselves, work together in early transparency and have a shared ambition. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Barney. So I'm taking away high risk, low return combination, but also innovation and impact investing and the ability to go into spaces that few others would think about, really, not to mangle Star Trek, but to really think about where you could really lead and then others could follow. And you've given really good examples. Thank you very much for that. And then last but definitely not least, we have Lewis, who is also UNEP's own Goodwill Ambassador. Lewis is the CEO of the Lewis Pugh Foundation. So over to you, Lewis.
Thank you so much. I want to speak to you today about swimming, because I think swimming is a really good analogy to explain what's actually happening to philanthropy. So just to give you some background, I'm an endurance swimmer. I swim in some of the most vulnerable ecosystems on Earth, and afterwards I try to get them protected. And I have served for the past 13 years as UNEP's patron of the oceans. Now, every single year, hundreds of people come from all over the world to a small town in England called Dover. And the reason why they come to Dover is because they want to try and swim across the English Channel. So far, about 2,700 people have swum across the English Channel. But every single year, hundreds of people make that journey, but sadly, they don't get across the English Channel to France. And what fascinates me about this journey is where people give up. They generally give up in two places, either within the first hour of leaving Dover as they start the swim, or within the last mile of arriving in France. They are literally a mile of France and they give up. And I ask myself, how is it possible that people could have trained so hard and they give up at these two places? Well, the answer is actually quite simple. The reason why people give up at the beginning is because they've been training in a swimming pool. And they think that training in a swimming pool is going to be good enough for when you actually get into the ocean. And then they dive into the ocean, and it starts throwing you around. And it's cold. And often, you start an English Channel swim because of the tides. You often start it at night. And so you could imagine, you're swimming for an hour, it's really cold, the waves are crashing around you, it's dark, and you think to yourself, have I got what it takes to swim for another 15 hours in this? And then they call the captain of the boat and they say, please take me out of here. Most people, though, they can get through that initial stage, and very, very few people give up in the middle. They swim and they swim and they swim, and then they swim for 2 hours, and then 5 hours, and then they get to the sort of 10-hour moment, and now they can begin to see the white cliffs of France. And often what happens is they arrive in France at the wrong time, and the current has turned. And it is impossible to swim against that current, and that current will drag you all the way down that French coast. And a 10-hour swim can suddenly, like this, become a 15-hour swim. And they just don't have it in them, and they give up right there. Why have I told you this story? Why have I told you this story? Well, philanthropy, I think, is actually very, very similar. Sometimes you find that philanthropists, they get involved, and then they actually don't even realize what they're getting involved in, and it's actually quite hard. It's really tough. And after 2 or 3 years, they say, no, we want to get out of this. Others, though, the swimmer or the NGO, it gets all the way to the end, and they are just so close to France, and they can deliver the result, but then the funding dries up, and they just don't have what it takes to finally deliver the tangible results which they were trying to seek to achieve. Earlier this year, President Macron invited 100 of us to come to France to talk about this. And I said to him, President, the single biggest issue right now is the drying up of philanthropy at an initial stage, at a grassroots stage. Some grassroots organizations are doing fantastic work, but the funding has completely dried up. And also, there's some organizations, and I'm sure she won't mind me saying this, but there's an organization that has been doing fantastic work, Ocean Legacy, Christian Mittermeier. I mean, you will never find a greater public speaker than her, working, taking photographs of what's happening in the world's oceans, documenting what's happening with indigenous communities. And she said to me, Lewis, it's just too hard now. It's just too hard. We can't carry on. You can understand. Some of the big NGOs have literally hoovered up all the money, and so what's happening is the great organizations, small organizations who are doing such great work, they've got nothing. The reason why I decided to come here to participate in this panel was to say we have to somehow distribute the funds more fairly so that we give those young people who are passionate, we give them a hand up, and also those who are running organizations who are doing such fantastic work, and the funding has dried up. We have to help them deliver on the fantastic results which they are doing.
Thank you so much, Lewis. A hand of applause and a round of applause for all three speakers, please. What I'm taking away is obviously swimming. But not just that. I think both the importance of the first mile and training well for the first mile, and not just in the swimming pool, but also thinking about that last mile. right? And clearly, the examples that you're giving are also about engaging with organizations that know how to work at the grassroots level with people, with the planet, and in a deep, non-siloed way to make sure that we are making an impact. And I think that really hit close, at least for me. I'm going to turn now to actually a slightly different profile of panelists. And so I'm really privileged to also introduce Goody and Richard. Goody on my left is the policy advisor in the government of Netherlands. And Richard is the special envoy on climate and environment to the president of Tanzania. And they both wear slightly different hats. But I'm going to first turn to Goody. And Goody is representing not just, of course, herself, but not just someone who's coming from the Netherlands and who is a very strong contributor to the Environment Fund of UNEP, which is a core fund, but also someone who thinks very deeply about what multilateral institutions, such as UNEP, can do. And so my question to you, Goody, and Goody also has been one of the big, strong proponents of bringing in and building those bridges with a diverse set of organizations, including philanthropies, including governments, and of course, international organizations and multilateral organizations like us. But so my question to you, Goody, is if I was to turn to Joss and to Bunny and to Lois and say, oh, you've got, your next $10,000, just a very, very small amount, where would you think they should put their money? Very small. So just to knock next dollar, where should the next dollar go if it was coming from well-intentioned, well-resourced organizations that are not very large, but are really committed to making people and planet resilient?
Thank you, Joe. And maybe just to provide a bit of background, so my government, I think, is a very long-time supporter of the work that UNEP is doing, but also the objective and the mission of UNEP. And that is one of the reasons why we provide our funding unconditional, and in some cases also some seed money with the intention also to leverage. I think that is, what I hear from your collaboration with some of the partners that we see, and that is also what we recognize. I think I heard in the stories that you told that it's all about impact and getting things done on the ground. And I think in the relationship between UNEP and the organizations, it is important that you understand where your role is and how you can reinforce each other, because from the stories I heard, there's a lot that you share in terms of what you want to achieve, and there's a different role to play. So now, coming back to your question relating to the tiny bit of $10,000, I wouldn't have a very concrete suggestion on where to spend it, but I think there could be some criteria or considerations that you could have, which could guide you in making such a decision. And I think, and that is then also depending on the organizations that you're looking at, I think there's considerations about how does the little leverage that you give help elevate attention to the topic that you're addressing, or help others to be convinced to start their investments in the right direction, so to speak. So I think that is also about leveraging, about making sure that you can work together in a way that the impact that you want to achieve gets more traction, you raise more attention to the topic. And I heard a couple of very good examples. So it could be in the space of making scientific information available so you can raise awareness, so that also other people have better understanding of where their contribution could be. And so I think there's no silver bullet to your question when it comes to leveraging the funding, but I think it is necessary to start thinking about how to strategically engage with each other and see how together, if you have shared objectives, how together you can enhance the impact. I think we are now in a very, let's say, stressed time where we know and we can see already and you can feel already that public finance is going to be less available, it's more difficult, and where we have to be more creative into looking at how we can leverage the finance that is necessary to reach those people or to address those problems that need to be addressed where you share your objectives. And in doing so, I think there's also a need to think more out of the box. I don't expect UNEP and philanthropical organizations to have the same relationship as we have, for example. I think you should try to come together and look at your strengths and try to reinforce the work to make basically the impact where 1 and 1 is 3. And I think that means, in my view, that when you start a collaboration, you need to be clear amongst yourself what is it that you want to achieve, where is the impact that you're looking for, but also then how do you report and monitor that, and how can you do, I think, what washing was your impact washing? I think that is actually going to damage both organizations. So I think you need to be also clear on what kind of criteria you set and the information that is necessary to build a trust amongst the organizations to be able to work with each other, but also for us to put trust in you to work with the philanthropical sector. But I think the same applies for collaboration with the private sector as well as financial institutions. I leave it with that.
Thank you so much, Goody. And I'm going to turn to you, Richard. You are coming from Tanzania. You've also had a long and very distinguished career within government, and you've also worked with financing and funding institutions. You've been on the board with the GCF and other institutions. So my question to you is, to what extent can we think of bringing these 3 or 4 actors together in new modalities that we are witnessing today, say blended finance platforms, and also think about intentional giving? So bringing in clearly government, philanthropies, multilateral institutions. Do we have enough experience to understand as to what could work if we did bring all types of these actors together to truly make an impact on the ground? And what's the role of philanthropies?
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'll start by thanking you for convening this important discussion. I think for the first time, I think UNEP is convening this. And for us, coming from the government, and particularly from Tanzania and Africa, as you said, it's really important to note that philanthropies have a unique role to the continent. I'll come to that. You raised very important questions. I've worked in these multilateral funds and all that, and I'm working as an advisor to my government and my president on issues of environment and climate change. And I think one of the key challenges we have been facing as a country and as a continent, and I'm speaking also as the chair of the African Group of Negotiators now, is funding in a broader context. I think in that context, we are faced with maybe 2 particular issues. One, the structural approach of how countries are being funded, and also the accessibility of the funding. Now, when you talk about the role of philanthropies, I think this way, I think UNEP, we have so much to play in terms of what we are convening today, because some of the challenges we have been getting in terms of the resources we get from the international community is how do you get an early mover, a risk taker, who is ready to provide resources for a cause. And this is where you see the philanthropy is coming in handy. Because in many instances, and I'll give you an example, in Africa, much of the talked about resources towards greening the global economy, only Africa gets 4% of the private sector flows. And therefore, you need to look at the early movers who can unlock even additional private sector funding, who are ready to take the risk and give away to those who are ready to come in, and these are the philanthropies. So for me, I think the role of philanthropy is bringing together even others on board is critically important. Because I have been on the GCF board, for example. Getting the resources we are together there to Africa takes not less than 2 years for a project. But look at the impacts within the 2 years which you are creating in terms of additional impact to an ecosystem, to a community, to the environment. But these early movers are ready to come in to leverage within the little amount of resources they are providing to make a difference, so that when we come on board to the GCF, the AF, at least there is already something moving on the ground. And this is why I think we need to find a way to ensure that there is a systematic approach where the philanthropies can work together with governments, with the private sector, as well as these funds under the various bodies. I'm talking about the funds under the Convention on Climate Change. We have the GCF, we have the Adaptation Fund, we have the GF, now we have the Loss and Damage Fund, and of course the LDC Fund. These are important funds, but accessibility of these funds is the challenge. And this is where you philanthropies are critically important. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Richard. Early mover, risk taker, convening, and ensuring access, really getting organizations to think about how, especially vulnerable communities, local communities can access a lot of these resources. Ladies and gentlemen, we are at that bewitching hour where I turn to you and see if you have questions. And I already have a hand. And please, quick introduction, please, and a question, provocative, if possible. Over to you.
Can you hear me better now? Yep. Right, Anssi Mikola from a company called River Recycle. We stop ocean pollution by creating circular economy. And we've been doing that on philanthropic and official development aid funding. We've been successful in 5 locations around the world, in the Philippines, Ghana, India, Indonesia, and so on. And what we found, there's a huge gap between the philanthropic funding that we have and then the likes of Jeff. We tend to find money at above $100 million level, but our next step from the first $500,000 would only be $5 million. So my question to the panel is, how could we use philanthropic money to multiply these existing solutions to so many places that there would be a portfolio that the $100 million could actually use? Because right now the gap is too big. We would need 30 of our solutions to be interesting to a $150 million funder. How does philanthropy help?
Very good question. I'm going to take a couple more from the floor, but great question. How can philanthropy help to bridge that gap between the 5 million and the 100 million? Yes, please.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Masha Kalinina. I'm with the Pew Charitable Trusts, and we are very happy partners with many of you on stage. Thank you for that. We actually just launched a new report. There was a press conference next door, so can I just share some fresh ink with you that's relevant to this conversation? It's a report from a group called Indoforen, funded by Pew, Campaign for Nature, and Rainforest Foundation Norway. It's about funding 30 by 30, and where are we? So international funding to developing countries for 30 by 30 has risen 150% since 2014. It's reached over $1 billion as of 2024. But at this rate, by 2030, we will still be $4 billion short of what CBD in Target 19 says we need to actually succeed with 30 by 30. But here's the good news. Philanthropic center funding has increased by 89% since 2014. So we're showing up in these spaces, and I think that's really exciting. And I think the slightly unfortunate news is that a lot of the funding is concentrated in a very small group of funders. So 54% of what's going to Target 3 comes from Germany, the World Bank, the GEF, the European Union, and the United States. So what that tells us is that it's not diversified sufficiently, and when we have political swings, like we're seeing this year, we really leave ourselves very vulnerable. How can we diversify?
Question.
Yes, how can we diversify this investment from such a small concentrated number of investors? Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Marcia. One more question before I turn back to the panel. Okay, the gentleman has the mic.
Hello everyone, my name is Kishoe Isaiah from Kenya and also part of the Kofi Annan research group. And recently there was a report from British group called High Impact Philanthropy, and we managed to get 2 findings on the same in regards to philanthropy. And they say that when USAID was cut, some of the funders was afraid to substitute the governments. And the second finding was philanthropic foundations are facing enormous competition from, and they're now sticking with their grantees and renewing support. And others are based on references and also stage of work. So my question is, now that funders are issuing small grants, and also they're afraid of issuing small grants. You find that maybe probably you need 100 million, so, and for them, small organizations, they need 200 million, or even 2,000. So how are we going to move from understanding the dynamics that shape the philanthropic world, especially for grassroots and also small level organizations? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ishwar. So I think I'm hearing, how do we get access to small grants, which are far smaller than what's currently out there? Paraphrasing. Okay. You're on the hot seats, ladies and gentlemen. So can I give the mic to anyone? Bunny, thank you.
I guess I can combine the first 2 questions to a degree. So I guess every philanthropy has a different scale in which they work in, and there is a full spectrum in which is a average grant to a sizable grant, and there is a big gap, and there's a ginormous funding gap in general, which we did talk about at the start. One of the roles that we play to try build momentum in the sector is building coalitions between similar impact-aligned organisations to work in a way that allows us to know what each other are doing, make sure that we're not pulling away or causing duplication of effort. In addition to that, creating field building and capability building across the sector. So convening of like-minded organisations to actually discuss and talk through emerging gaps, areas that maybe certain organisations can't fill but can see the need for that gap, sharing information. So it allows us to be more effective and be a more effective sector. There's still a long way to go, and obviously there needs to be more philanthropies. Getting to your question, I guess in terms of diversifying, I guess that's the question of wealth, that there needs to be more equality generally, and I guess that what you're describing as it is actually a systematic, I guess, issue due to the equality of wealth and its distribution globally. So multilateralism and all the processes in which that we obviously support generally there needs to be systems change to address those systematic problems.
Thanks, Bonnie. I think, and to go back to both Hans's and Marsha's question, some of the modalities that we are witnessing today, I dream about this is no longer a dream, it's happening, but you can have platforms, Hans, where you can have philanthropies, but also organizations like UNEP coming in to take exactly the kind of first loss, high risk, lowest tranche of a blended platform or structured finance platform, which is a portfolio approach and not a single deal approach. Because one of the key things that we are witnessing in this space is also the huge amount of transactional costs in putting together a multi-agent transaction or a deal, right? And which is why we are thinking about, well, how do you go from 0.5 to 5 to 100 million, or how do you get to the people who need $2,000 on the ground? But I think the question is, can we create these portfolio approaches where you have a diversity of risk, a distribution of risk, but some common expectation of a return, which can be below market, but which can then help us to invest in these deal sizes, which are of differing size, of differing amounts, and give us a diversity of risk. So it also helps us to hedge. And that's one of the things that I think we can and should be thinking about, and where UNEP comes in, and I'm really excited and privileged to also have my co-conspirator here, Sumi, who will talk about this as well. But where UNEP can play a really important role in not just convening, but providing that trust that you all spoke about, and ensuring that we are getting impact on the ground, but also bringing together a diversity of actors, right? Because it's not just the philanthropies, and it's not just the NGOs, and it's not just the World Banks, and it's not just the multilateral development banks. It's all of them coming together with a diversity of risk appetites that we really want to have together. Because the last number, and I promise you this is the last number I'll put out, global debt today is 230% of global GDP, right? How do we transcend that gap? Joss, Lewis, did you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you.
No, so okay, I'll give it to you first, and then you can give it.
I think it's on. It woke up. I'm not going to be able to address the question about, how do you bridge those funding gaps, because we're not a funder. What I would say, though, is that the figures are quite important. Philanthropic funding, as I said earlier, contributes to putting issues on the table that are difficult and that nobody wants to tackle. It's a question of challenging the status quo. If you aggregate all the money that goes towards that, it's actually a big figure. But all of that is also the result of very strong strategic thinking, intricate planning, long-term in general. And when philanthropy is discussed, it's only a figure. So we bypass completely the strategic thinking and the pathways to change. So one thing that I would potentially ask is to make more space for the thinking that goes behind the figures, because otherwise we reduce this to a mere transactional exercise, which I don't think is actually fair compared to the impact that it has. So more space in the multilateral process to also expand on those strategies and why these investments go where they go, because it's a long-term strategy in general, and we're plagued by short-termism.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I was very moved by the Kenyan question about how to get money into grassroots organizations. So I've been doing this stuff now for 40 years. And the longer I'm in this, the longer I realize I know so little about how to do fundraising. When people say, oh, how do I get from 50 million to 100 million? I'm just thinking about the grassroots organizations who simply don't have the capacity or with due respect, we haven't had the education in how to do this fundraising. If UNEP and philanthropists really want to make a difference, the way to do this is to educate, educate, educate. And what I mean by that is putting on an online course with the best people who can advise the grassroots organizations who are filled with people with passion, filled with people who want to really protect their local environment and teach them how to access that money. I'll never ever forget, there's an area down in Antarctica. It's called the Ross Sea. It's the most astonishing place one can ever visit. If you sail from the bottom of New Zealand and you sail from 40 degrees south to 50 to 60 to 70, eventually you will see something that looks like the white cliffs of Dover. But it's not. It's complete ice. This was one of the last remaining places on this planet which was so precious. And for 17 years, the diplomats between between New Zealand and America had been shuttling backwards and forwards to try and get this place protected, and they were completely unsuccessful. I met somebody who said to me, he said, Lewis, if you want to go down there and do a swim and then go and meet the big decision makers in Russia, I'll help fund that. It was truly astonishing. So I went down there, I did a swim. I then went to Moscow. I could never ever have done this without the funding of this man. The idea that you can go down and do a swim and then go meet the inner circle around President Putin is such la-la land. But honestly, this man said to me, he said, I will help finance this. You know, the day that Russia joined the rest of the world to agree to protect the Ross Sea, it's the size of Britain, France, Germany, Italy all together. It was the happiest day of my life. But we could never, ever have done that without that one philanthropist who said, I will help you and I will back you. So I urge philanthropists to take some of the risky stuff. It works. You can't keep going to the same closed door with the same set of keys. Sometimes you need to try new things. And we need to provide the finance for the grassroots and the activists to try the new things.
Thank you very much, Bonnie and Joss and Lewis. And I'm going to turn to you now, Richard. And I want to go back actually to Marcia's question. How do we diversify, but also ensure that, you have all these actors coming together to pull together in the same direction?
Well, as I said, I think it's all using these people to ensure that the diversification is based on first movers. You see, even at government level, I'll tell you, we in Tanzania, in fact, we have also been working at the government level with some philanthropies. My president had greater discussions with Bloomberg himself in terms of how we can work together on climate change-related issues, in particular in the area of clean cooking and support to energy access to Africa and all those things. The reason we did this, and many African countries are doing at that level, is how do you bring all these key players together, but starting with the first set. We already are requesting resources, for example, from these international organizations, the financing institutions, like, as I said, I mentioned the GCF and all others. But the time it takes and the process it takes is so long, you cannot get the impact you need within the time frame which the communities want, which the societies want. So that's where you need to blend this with the philanthropies who can come in earlier to ensure that you can move the societies, the communities, as you wait for, I would say, bigger resources for a longer time.
Thank you, Richard. And what I'm hearing is actually there is a huge role for philanthropy for doing something that may not be, how should I say, super cool, right? because there is a role for also taking the sand out of the system. And access, providing access to small grassroots organizations, ensuring that they have access to it requires a systems change. And that may not look super cool, but it's a huge way, a huge pivot in the way we do business as well. We are ready for our second round. So Masako, if you could please help with a mic here, please. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Angela Tenbrook, and I'm the Executive Director for the Center for Sustainable Agricultural Excellence and Conservation. Today, I have one responsibility: to ensure farmers, especially small farm holders, are not left out of the environmental and funding strategy. They are the most important way we eat in this world. To make a point, first on how we, the farmers, work towards 8 of the SDGs. I want to remind you that many of these are children, youth, women, and girl child. We must address how water scarcity is a food security crisis. Integrated aquaculture and agriculture systems act as climate stabilizers, eliminating agricultural runoff to protect shared waters all the way to the ocean, and building wealth through local production rather than extractive models. How can you empower and fund these initiatives to put food where food is needed most? Using both indigenous and futuristic technologies to small farm holders that are primarily children, youth, and women. Improving technologies that are circular, sustainable, and give equity in forgotten communities. So just as you guys have been talking, I've been over here thinking we have opportunities to put food where food is needed in 47 facilities that we've already built successfully. How can we really change the dynamic of, I don't need 10 million. Okay, I can make major change. With 10 million, I can make a major change. My projects collectively haven't cost 10 million. 47 projects collectively. Because you like numbers, let me point something out to you. In order for us to be able to feed 3 meals a day to people, we need 37,000 acres in continuous production to be able to feed a population of 1 million people. We don't have that. So we have to have ideas that will percolate and allow us to be able to develop, and this means risk in agriculture that doesn't include chemicals and harmful runoffs for the global south. I'm wondering where the funding is for the opportunity for the people in the global south to be able to get these technologies.
Thank you. So funding for people in the global south to access technologies. That's your question. Masako, if you could help. Thank you. And then I promise I'll look to the left of the room as well. So, yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Kellen. I'm from the United States. I'm a student there at George Washington University. And when I talk to students, many of whom are really interested in getting engaged in the philanthropic space, the number one complaint, or not even complaint, the number one concern I hear from students is not about pay or about the ability to make the impact they want, but that there's not pathways into philanthropic work, that they don't really see clear ways for them to become engaged in that due to either lack of job opportunities, lack of training programs, or anything else. And so I'm wondering, from your perspective, how philanthropies can build out those pathways more robustly for students who are interested to become more engaged and to do that work.
Great question. Thank you, George Washington. And left.
Yes, hello. My name is Alexandra. I represent N Plus Group. We're the largest independent hydro...
Closer to the mic.
We're the largest independent hydropower producer in the world. A lot of what you said today really resonates not just with me personally, but with our company's mission. At N Plus Group, especially what you said about working with smaller scale and grassroots initiatives. At N Plus, we refer to our regions of operations as regions of responsibility, and I'd like to, just a few numbers since you started with numbers. In 2024, our social investments amounted to $76 million, and if we look at environmental investments, that's just under $213 million US dollars. And we're not the only ones. We know a lot of business is investing, and when we look at our region, we sit next to Lake Baikal, so we've published a report together with other local stakeholders on corporate and NGO contribution to the sustainable development agenda of the lake and the region. So my question to you is, thus far there's been little mention during the session of corporate philanthropic contributions, and how big of a role do you still see corporations play in the future of philanthropy? And what are the biggest challenges in engaging the private sector, in your opinion?
Wow, that's a three-part question. Okay, thank you very much, Alexandra. Should we do one more, and then I will turn back to the panel? So, Marguerite, thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Natalia. I'm from UNEP. I'm coordinating the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. And I wanted to ask you if you have the appetite for the pooled funding, because we're working with so-called MPTF, which is Multi-Partner Trust Fund, and it's a blended and mixed funding. And we're really, I mean, currently we have like donor funding, bilateral funding, but it's really high appetite to get private sector and also philanthropists on board. And in this case, it would allow actually to get to this Kenyan question, because we do have the program, we do have the pipeline, and then if you merge, then it's exactly, you're just building up. So are you ready? And what should we do to make you ready? Thank you.
What should we do to make you ready? So I have, what should we do to make you ready? Question on corporate philanthropic funding and how can that be really leveraged? A question about pathways for students, and a question, the first one, sorry, cue me? Oh yes, smallholder farmers. So, Richard, do you want to start first? And I'll go down the panel. Take any question you'd like.
Well, I just want to, not a question, to understand better Sandra, no? You said Sandra, and you said the question was, you are doing the hydro work, and you are trying to see how you can you repeat the question, because I wanted to pick on you. Yes, you can access. Yes, so yeah, that's a question, I mean, to these people, but I would say, maybe from my experience, I would say the challenge is how they can actually understand each other in terms of what are your missions and what this sort of approach is their mission and how you can come together. One, I think for me, I don't know how much you engage also in mini hydros and all that, but I think most of the philanthropists would want to work in a much more concise way in terms of hydropower, maybe mini hydros and other things, but you are looking at a broader context of hydro production, which is more of a corporate approach, and therefore you are looking at larger resources, which is maybe could be a bit challenging to the resources and how they are looking at the resource allocation, the way they're approaching these things. In my country, I would say we are working with the philanthropies at the micro level, but not at the larger government level. So this is where we see the differences. But I think this question could be answered by my colleagues because they are the ones engaging in this. Just giving an example of what is happening at a national level.
Thank you, Richard. Joss, do you want to go first, or I was going to ask?
Yeah, if that's all right. I'll take the one on corporate funding specifically because we do work with the private sector. I think it's also important to many different types of philanthropy. What we do in the space, I think that thing is dying. Can I have the other one, please? Technological challenge. So we work specifically in circular economy, which is roughly in the scope of SDG 12, so consumption and production. We deal with the whole value chain transformation, which means that it's very different to work with the private sector in that context than for the private sector to put money, philanthropic money, towards targeted projects such as conservation in a very specific region. The way we do it, I would rather that the money that the private sector commits to that change goes to internal change, to change their practices, and to actually, we are there to help accompany that change. But in that sense, if we look at system change, value chain transformation, and it remains a philanthropic effort, it remains a CSR effort, which means that we don't challenge the underlying conditions or the underlying processes. So in a way, the engagement from our side of the spectrum is really about how can we mobilize some money in order to help transform those value chains so that we deal with the drivers of the things that we want to address, which is the triple crisis. The drivers are sustainable production and consumption. And if we shift those models towards more circular ones, including in agriculture, and that was mentioned earlier, that's where we can make a difference. So I think qualifying the levels and the types of philanthropic funding is also very helpful because it's not one homogeneous bucket.
Thank you. I'll tackle the pathways ones for students into philanthropy. So, and I can only speak from my experience in my organisation, but every single person that works in my organisation has a completely different background, and not a single one of them goes from being a student to being in philanthropy. All of them have had a different pathway. And I guess in terms of that diversity piece, I think it's what's really important is they've all experienced other sectors, worked in different spaces, and come with a lot of insight from very different viewpoints. I personally have a mathematics degree, a quantitative biology degree, as well as a PhD in how to, in biodiversity conservation, but it's about how to spend money most effectively to achieve the ultimate outcomes that you're after. But I didn't go from there into philanthropy. I worked in conservation. My colleague here is a trained lawyer. Others have commercial backgrounds. Others have worked in communications or are political advisors, have worked within government, have advised important people in decision making, and then bring that to the sector. So I guess my advice is that can be your shining star in the distance, but I would highly encourage you to diversify, experience something else, come back to it, because I think it's an incredibly hard area to break into as your graduate role.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Bonnie. And I'm going to say also technical skills. My team will tell you, there's just no substitute for it. I teach as well, and I think that's the huge value add that you can bring to both go deep and sometimes go a little bit wide. But for now, go deep. Sorry, Liz.
I'm not sure I've got really a lot to add, except when it comes to philanthropy for my organisation. Swimming is a really bad way. I see the whole world through the lens of swimming. But it's really, most of our money comes from corporate money. Now, I'm not a racing car driver or a sailor. Now, you look at all the branding space on a racing car, and you look at people like Lewis Hamilton and these people with all the logos everywhere, or you look at a yacht where they've got a massive spinnaker and the hull of a yacht. All we have is my backside, yeah, as a swimmer. So that is the only space which we can actually sell. Because what I do is that my cap, I have donated to the United Nations Environment Programme.
Yay.
Yeah, but I really believe in the importance of the UN Environment Programme, and there have been many, many times when commercial sponsors have come along and said, Lewis, can you please wear our cap with this and this and this logo? And I've said, it just wouldn't feel right. I'm proud to wear the logo of the United Nations Environment Programme and to represent every country on an environmental issue. But one has to try and if you're looking for commercial partners, to try and find those where your values actually meet. Because otherwise the tension can actually be quite hard, where companies are asking you to do something and It just doesn't sit with your values. Yep.
Thank you, Louis, also for being so intentional and being such a great champion of UN environment. We really treasure it. But Bonnie and Joss, thank you really very, very much also for really bringing your wisdom in the way you work with corporations and the way you think about intentional giving. But I think your message, Bonnie, also to students, really very eloquent and sat very well with me. Richard, I don't want to go through that one question on the smallholder farmer, because this is a question which is very close to my heart, right? We have the innovations. Clearly, we need to think about scale, and a large part of impact comes from scale. And this is not just about philanthropy, but just thinking more widely, and it's the question you're getting to, access, access, access. Take the sand away from the machinery. Are there other ways where we can combine or convene together or build partnerships which may or may not include philanthropies, but which could really help to catalyze this access that you wish people would just wake up and think about?
Very difficult, but if I step in the shoes of the question which was raised by my colleague down there, I think the challenge, and that's why you're putting a question to me, has always been, particularly to those small-scale farmers, access, but also the whole question of even understanding the small-scale farmers' challenges themselves, because access also comes from understanding. And for me, I think what lacks in many ways is how, and this was raised by, I think, you who said training, how we can ensure that the trainers can work with the financiers to create the capacity of these people. Because really what lacks is the capacity to access those resources comes from the capacity to understand on how to access these resources. And for me, one area where I think we need to come together is those people who have skills, who have resources to train, to ensure that they bring these people on board, be trained, and ensure that they get at the capacity where they can access these resources. To me, that's what I can.
Thank you, Richard. So it also makes me think of a few things, right? In my previous incarnation, in my previous life, we were working with a whole host of foundations and other organizations, including development banks. But one of the biggest challenges in bringing together a whole host of partners was not speaking the same language, right? And so whether it's philanthropies and then multilateral organizations or development banks or the private sector, they all want to come together, huge good intention. But the language that we all speak is very, very different. And just bringing everyone together to speak the same language, I think is the first move that we all need to make, and this is why we are all here. But I think the other thing is also in recognizing that we have a lot of the ideas. It's once you have the practice of doing something. So we have the example of the Seychelles Marine Bond, for example, ladies and gentlemen. Many years ago, it was the first bond which was put out for marine protected areas. Very small amount, $20 million, right? But what it did was to then set up, I think in a very innovative way, many other things that have started to happen. Debt for nature swaps, debt for resilience swaps, thinking about pollution bonds. And again, UNEP and the Multilateral Environment Agreement actors that UNEP is very proud to host, including BSR, so the Basel, Stockholm, Rotterdam Convention. I reversed it, thank you. Sorry. Really putting out a pollution bond and thinking about a pollution bond is really giving us the practice to do this first in a small way and then making us learn at a systemic level as to how to do this next time better and bigger. And I think that's what we can all think about. Come in small, practice, learn, and then scale. And then really introduce ideas such as this also in the convening that we are planning here. And Richard, so sorry to put you on the spot, but I think that's what we want to do. We want to get to the smallholder farmers. We want to get to the grassroots organizations. What we are not doing is recognizing that sand or those obstacles that are clearly there. And if we can start to innovate, slowly learn, train the system, not just the swimmer, and start to think about, okay, what are we learning, and then scale up with baby steps, I think we'll get there. Most recently, Ecuador, Benin, Barbados have now done these multi-million-dollar deals, which are swaps, but from which we are learning yet again how to bring different actors together. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to do one or two burning questions and then hand it over to my wonderful co-conspirator here, Sumi Rowe, to take you to the end.
Hello, my name is Judy. I'm from Stop Ecocide International. We're a global NGO. We do advocacy and provide expertise to governments in the development of ecocide law around the world to protect the planet. So we've been going 7 years. We've been going 7 years since 2018, and in our total expenditure since we started is less than $5 million. And people say to us, my God, you're making such a difference with such a small amount of money. How are you doing this? Because, of course, the trick is you've got to look like you've got more money than you have, which is always this kind of thing, because you don't want to look poor, but you also, you know. And so we're desperately scrabbling around to kind of find the money. We've got all of these things we want to do. And, you know, like I said, people outside go, this is bloody amazing. And then we go to things like New York Climate Week. We go to an event and they're spending, I don't know, $250,000 on a 2-hour event. And I'm thinking, what the hell? I mean, if I were a funder and it were my money, I would want to know that I was getting value for money. And I don't understand how, from a funder's perspective, I don't kind of get the thinking that it's sensible to spend $250K on hiring a fancy hotel room and a fancy dinner or snacks or whatever for one event. And, you know, I'm just trying to, I need to get into the minds of the funders to understand how I can make us be more attractive to funders, if that makes sense.
I think one more question. Yeah, I see.
Hi, it's Sam from UNEP, and nice to see you, Joss, on the panel. Just a question for me around culture and risk-taking, and just about you grow by going through discomfort and pushing yourself into new places that you don't normally have to do. And I was just curious, just with what Joe was saying around sand out of the machine at UNEP, and it's a question about, is the machine full of sand, or does the machine need to change in order to not have any sand in it, because it might be a newer machine that doesn't have sand in the first place. So there's something for us to think about. But the question I had is around risk. And if anyone on the panel could talk about the risk that they took, either with a funder that came through in the right way or a funder that came through in the wrong way. Because I think for me, a lot of this is not about strategy. It's not about what you do, but it's about relationships and risk-taking. So if you've got any good kind of inspiration for us about the risks that you took and what that led to, I think that'd be really good to hear. So I'll hand it back to you. Thank you.
Yes, there was a burning question also, so let me just take the two, and then, yeah, we pass it over to the panel.
Yes. The mic? Okay. Hi, I'm Varsha Rajko. I'm from India, and I have my small firm, Oceanic Divas. So I can relate to him completely because I'm a national level swimmer as well and always been a water baby, so your stories are quite relevant. I have had no sponsors, it's all self-funded, and my parents, my mom and dad have been my sponsor. That's how I competed even in nationals. So I started this firm in 2019, named it as Oceanic Divas. Like I said, I'm a water baby. And I started working towards coral and mangrove restoration. Recently, I launched my project in Malaysia in the month of August. Every year in my birthday, I scuba dive. I'm a certified scuba diver as well. So when I dived, life changed. I actually knew there was a lot of changes, and climate change, when we talk about global warming, climate change, it's actually happening. But these kind of projects, especially when it's related to divers, it comes with a lot of cost. So I've spoken to a lot of people in and around, and they said that to sustain life, you need to have some funding. You cannot keep self-funding the projects. And I'm planning to do this in Australia, Philippines. I have a lot of support, but whenever it comes to investments, there are people who are like backing out. So I would like to know that if our intentions are to go global, and we really want to do this, how do we sustain in a long run? Because we really don't know where to approach and who are the right connect to go about for the projects. And there are millions of people who are working towards it. The project that I did was with the indigenous community, and to provide economy to the marine belt was the intention. And we involved a lot of youth, because marine belt, that youth tend to go in a wrong direction. Most of the time, they don't choose education. And if you talk to them about environment, they don't really care. But if you tell them that, you know, you do this much, we give you a green badge or something, they really put a lot of interest. And of course, social media, like you'll be featured in some social media, so they put a lot of interest to come and join the program. So I would just like to know, for people who are actually trying to do something on their own, how do they sustain such projects for a long run? Thank you.
Thank you. And Jenny says the last one.
Thank you very much. My name is Janice Golding. I'm from UNEP. Just to center the conversation back to philanthropy, I wanted to get into the mind of philanthropists who support and donate for specific causes based on values, tax incentives perhaps, and other strategic objectives. But there are some perhaps common patterns and trends associated to what philanthropists avoid altogether or fund reluctantly. And I was wondering about what the research tells us. What are the common areas generally that philanthropists avoid? Is it environmental work based on chemicals and action? Or is it, in fact, certain conservation-oriented projects? But it would be good to know a little bit about what they tend to avoid. And I also wanted to understand some trends and patterns associated to regional philanthropies. In Africa, there are a few super, super rich individuals. I think the world's top 20, I think there are 2 from Africa. And I wondered about regional representation of top philanthropists. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now back to my very distinguished panelists. And I noticed I just took over a seamless transition from Joe. But I think the first question was really about how can it be more attractive, particularly to make a big difference with small money as the funders. And then perhaps I will ask either Bonnie to answer that. And then for the risk-taking, either Joe or even Richard. And then for the ocean and rivers risk, I do actually have to ask you for that. How do we sustain the long-run approach, particularly the self-funded in the marine belt? And obviously, any of the panel members to address what are the common areas that the philanthropic sectors avoid? Over to you.
I'll try to tackle a little bit of the first question and a little bit of the last question. So I guess my advice is that almost every philanthropy has a very defined strategy and impact mission themselves. And so, but even if it's not philanthropy, even if it's grant giving from other organisations that aren't defined as philanthropy, it's usually impact driven. So a huge part of it is probably homework in understanding what the funding, I guess getting to your point, the incentives and the missions that various funders are trying to fill. And then just trying to seek where you think you have alignment with their views so that you craft your pitch to what they are wanting to achieve. I think it's an incredible art, but you can... there's very little core funding available for just organisations that have no overlap. So it's finding where those overlaps are. In terms of philanthropies making decisions that don't seem to make sense, how you were describing the different values. I mean, obviously we seek impact and do try to understand for what dollar, for what impact we're going to achieve. So we in ocean conservation areas try to concentrate in areas that we think are underrepresented, and actually for the price, for the amount of money that's needed, a lot more can be achieved than in some areas that it costs a lot more. So embedded within that thinking is to seek out opportunities where there is underrepresentation and gaps, and that can be filled for the least amount of money, so that the money goes further for the amount of impact. So, and getting to your point about avoiding, I guess part of that is that most philanthropies do want to fill a gap that they can be proud of and have a legacy. So there's often an area that they will really strive to achieve through their grant giving. In terms of areas that we like to avoid, I guess is areas that we think that it would be perceived as, I guess going back to the original concept of greenwashing or impact washing, we really want to go with integrity and science and evidence-based approaches. So yeah, I guess that's our philosophy. I don't know if that's the case for all philanthropy, but it means that we look to ground what we're doing in evidence and have some credibility with the approach. At the same time, we're also risk takers. So if there is enough due diligence to sort of show that this is high potential, high gains, there's an opportunity for philanthropists to go with that sort of model too. And it really depends on that risk appetite of different philanthropies. And each of them would be different, similar to having different pathways to impact that they're seeking. So,
thank you so much. Maybe Jules and Luis can sort of help us cover any additional points. And yeah.
Yeah, I'll take Sam's question actually from a different perspective, not the risk of parting with a large sum of money, which is what we do not do, but sometimes the risk of actually taking a large sum of money as well. As really short story, a funder of ours gave us the money to create a report on the circular economy opportunities of a specific region, which we did, delivered. It was very promising. The figures stacked up. They came back to us and said, well, you're not going to not do anything with this, right? The potential is there. You need to go and open an office and have actually impact on the ground in that region, which was, in terms of the capital necessary and the implications for the organization, quite big. Put together a figure, they said, yes, go for it. And at that point, you realize that actually it is big. You're not necessarily set up for it. And you need to dispel the myth that anything can be solved by throwing more money at it. If too much money goes to the wrong organization, or an organization that doesn't know to say, actually, I can't do this on my own, it's really problematic. We did a lot of soul searching. We decided together with the funder to take the risk. They understood the risk for them. We understood the risk ourselves. And of course, well, our founder is Ellen MacArthur. She's not one to say no to a challenge, so we did it. And it turned out okay. It's all great, but there was a moment where we were really questioning, should we take that money? Which is not necessarily intuitive.
So perhaps I can answer the question about India. 10 years ago, I was invited to go to Mumbai to Versova Beach. And I can honestly say it was one of the highlights of my life. So I arrived in Mumbai Beach. I was there with a guy called Michael Booth, who was a multimedia expert from UNEP. And we were there to meet a young Indian lawyer called Afroz Shah. And I don't think I've ever met anybody in the whole world like Afroz Shah. But what was happening was there was an enormous amount of plastic pollution washing up onto the shores of this beach. And he then decided, he said to himself, because he's got a small flat overlooking this beach, he said to himself, I can't allow this to happen. We've got to start cleaning this up. And so he went to his next door neighbor, and then he said, would you help me? And then 2 people became 4, and 4 people became 8. And this is the most astonishing thing. He's been doing this now for nearly 10 years. It's turned into the largest beach cleanup in history, where every single weekend, hundreds and hundreds of Indians from all sectors of society, frankly. You can find Bollywood stars going down there. You can meet the poorest of the poorest down there. And they go down there and they start cleaning this beach up. Why? And I went there, and I've never seen anything like it, because the plastic pollution was up to our kneecaps. And it just felt really, really overwhelming. And I said to Afroz, I said, how on earth do we clean this beach? And he says, you start at your feet. And they've cleaned the beach, yes. It needs to be cleaned regularly. The mangroves around Versova Beach need to be cleaned regularly. But why was Afroz so successful? I think, number one, because he was an advocate in the High Court in Mumbai. He knew how to speak. Like only an Indian can. He would, the international media would come there and he would say, you know, I want to have a date with the ocean. And I mean, he could get 1,000 people down onto the beach. I've just never seen anything like it. The second reason why he was so successful was because he was in it, not for himself. He was really in it for the community. And the third reason was because he was in it for the long term. There were so many people who said, we've seen this before, people trying to clean the beach, but yeah. Afroz and the Versova Beach volunteers are not just a model for India, but they're a model for the whole world. They really are, for long-term grassroots determination to clean something. You know, I don't think Afroz has received much funding at all. He started a small charity, the Afroz Shah Foundation, but I think the vast majority of the work which he does, which is so outstanding, is done by local volunteers. And I know that's not the news that you want to hear, especially your father, okay? But India's, I think, is such an extraordinary place with people with such open hearts that if you show that passion like Afroz had, you can mobilize enormous communities of people who can help. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And with so much enthusiasm and passion in the room, with the permission with my distinguished panels and the audience, we'll just extend by just a few more minutes from the 5 p.m. that we were supposed to finish, and I need to give floor to Richard on the last point before we actually close this very good sessions.
No, just to pick on what Bonnie said and on the risk. I think it's important to understand that risks levels are determined by the philanthropy itself, but also the type of activities, the cultural background and all that. What is important is to work together, the community with the philanthropies, to understand type of risks and the mitigation options which should be in place to ensure that the activity can go on, while understanding well that these risks could be mitigated through collaborative efforts.
Thank you so much. Luis, you want to?
No.
Okay, so now I have the biggest difficult task of the closing with the key takeaways and summaries. And just as an introduction, my name is Sumi Ro, and I'm actually under the Corporate Services Division of UNEP. My portfolio to this particular event is I'm in charge of the resource mobilization strategy as well as the UNEP partnership review. And from that perspective, I think it was really very, very important messaging that we actually shared today amongst all of us, which Joe started opening with the 3 key messages. And I think, if I may, I will actually cover like 4 very quick messages. The first being, I think today a lot of our discussion really underscored, there's a really strategic and catalytic collaborative relationship and dynamics between UNEP as your partner of your choice with our member states and also with the philanthropic sectors, but also how do we actually leverage our collaboration into the next steps. And because no single actor, particularly in our current climate of funding dried up, we use that word, and to how to actually do the capacity building, train the trainer, and then touch the cross-sectoral aspects. And from that perspective, we can't do it alone, but together we can. And our next message that we want to go home with, this is really because of such a challenging situation that we all face, whether as a UN entity, whether as a government, whether as a philanthropic sector, whether as a private sector, or as our individual, self-funded, believers, this is a pivotal opportunity to really leverage a challenging situation to what do we want to go next. And for that, I think we really heard a lot about philanthropy, not just as a funder or the high risk taker, but also is a advocacy. And really, with our goodwill ambassador as Luis, but also, George and Bunny, you have really inspired and touched us about in some of the areas that we haven't tapped on, and then how we actually really use that catalytic relationship. And just as one data, every dollar invested through philanthropy is leveraged from US dollar 80 from institutional delivery platforms. So it's really, if you talk about a return of investment, that's really something that we need to tap on. Then the last message: what will UNEP do to be the better partner? And as a long-time administrator, and I'm acutely aware, whether it's a government, whether it's a philanthropic sector, whether it's a private sector, UN is not the easiest partner to work with. But again, leveraging these challenging situations, there's a lot of talk internally within the UN system and UNEP that we need to be a little bit, think outside the box. We need to be a little bit more flexible. We need to make the engagement modality easier. How do we actually make the multi-stakeholders really get it easier to work with UN and UNEP. And that's the area that we will focus on. So with that, really thank you for such a passionate discussion and interest from the audience, and also the really rich questions that it really provoked us a lot. And I have to say, as a last point, Luis, I'm usually I gave up on the first lesson after the swimming, but however, you inspired me, whether it's a swimming or whether it's this journey that we are taking with our partners. We will continue to do the training. We'll continue to be resilient for the people and our planet and our Mother Earth. And for that, thank you so much once again, and thank you, everyone.